welcome to our public forum. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming this evening. Obviously, you're probably aware we called a very late minute audible and ended up here. And so we're thankful that this facility was available and thankful all of you are coming. My name is Jeff Motter. I'm going to be one of the moderators this evening. And I want to start by what I will be doing is giving you the background of our speakers tonight, and after a few brief comments by myself. And then when those are done, Susan Russo will come up and she will handle Q&A and have some finishing comments as well. We'd like you to hold your questions till the end, and again, there will be time for that at the end. Just so a little background, I became interested in this topic a couple years ago. I found out that, sorry about that. I learned that our city council had a big decision to make about the future of St. Charles Energy. To give you some background, we currently have a contract for our electrical power through 2035 with our supplier, Illinois Municipal Energy Agency, or IMEA. Last February, IMEA presented a new contract that would basically lock St. Charles into the existing contract for an additional 20 years until 2055. They asked that the new contract be signed by April of this year, 2025. On the table is this new 20-year contract, not effective for 10 years and valued at over $800 million based on our current usage. It contains no exit clause, no price guarantees, and we feel we should be asking the questions necessary to determine if this contract is the best fiscal option for St. Charles. In addition, 80% of the power we pay for from IMEA comes from 2 coal-fired plants. IMEA's main coal plant in southern Illinois is the worst greenhouse gas polluter in Illinois and among the 10 dirtiest in the United States. Given the rapidly changing energy landscape, we need to understand all our options and make the best choice for St. Charles. Tonight's meeting is to raise awareness about the contract before the City Council and provide financial and environmental considerations. Each of our speakers will provide some insights from their own area of expertise, and now I'm going to give you their backgrounds. Our first speaker will be Steve Abbott from Rocky Mountain Institute, also known as RMI. RMI is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating a prosperous, clean energy future. Steve has over 10 years' experience supporting a variety of organizations, including cities, universities, and large companies, in developing and deploying new energy strategies. Steve has advised cities such as Chicago and Cincinnati on their innovative clean energy contracts, and he led the development of cityrenewables.org, a website dedicated to clean energy opportunities for cities. He brings expertise in energy market analysis, economic modeling, risk mitigation, and project management. Dan Foley will be our second speaker tonight. Dan has over 30 years of energy sector experience in developing, building, owning, and operating traditional and renewable energy projects throughout North America. From 2013 to 2020, he served as the founder and CEO of GlidePath Power Solutions, LLP, a leading independent developer and owner of advanced energy systems. Prior to GlidePath, he was CEO of Ixonia Energy North America, one of the world's leading renewable energy companies. His background included experiences in power marketing, risk management consulting, engineering, and transmission/generation operations. Dan holds a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering from the University of Notre Dame, a Master of Engineering degree from State University of New York, and an MBA from the University of Chicago. Our third and final speaker tonight is Christine Nanichelli. Christine is responsible for guiding the strategic direction of Sierra Club's Beyond Coal work in Illinois, targeting the transition away from coal to clean energy. Christine has engaged in progressive campaign work and organizing for over 8 years. She has worked to build a dynamic grassroots movement to fight for healthy, sustainable communities for current and future generations. Christine holds a BA from Northwestern University in Religion and Political Science. Lastly, we want to thank some of our co-sponsors: Prairie Rivers Network, the League of Women Voters, Central Kane County, the Sierra Club, and RMI. And now I'd like you to give a warm welcome to Steve Abbott.
Is it on? Oh, I'll hold it closer. Okay. Similar to what Jeff said, thank you all very much for coming out on a cold night. Jeff already introduced me and RMI. This is a picture of one of our offices in the mountains in Colorado. It's net zero at over 7,000 feet. If you ever get a chance to go, I highly recommend a tour. So, building on what Jeff already said, St. Charles is facing a rare energy supply decision. These contracts tend to be signed every 20 years or sometimes longer. So what you all collectively decide and what the City Council decides will really impact the future of where you get your electricity and energy. My goal here is to offer a perspective on the implications of the contract on your electricity reliability, sustainability, and cost. And after I talk about those 3 items, I'm going to conclude with a few case studies of what other cities and communities have done, and talk about some possible next steps for St. Charles. So let's start with reliability. To start with, I want to note that St. Charles is located in what's called PJM. This is a regional transmission operator that spans from Virginia and North Carolina all the way up to this area in Illinois. And this is an organized market. So entities that own generation assets like coal assets or solar panels are able to sell that electricity into a market or to particular customers. And PJM is the entity that oversees these markets. Electricity, again, I already said this. And I want to make this point because the reliable operations of the grid across this entire region is ultimately the responsibility of PJM. It's not the responsibility of individual utilities or power providers to ensure that the amount of electricity being provided to the system is adequate for all the use on the system. Also just note that when talking about reliability, the vast majority of people losing their electricity when the lights go out is due to error or problems with the transmission lines, rather than problems with generation. So it's things like tree branches falling on the wires that deliver electricity to your house. If that was a particular problem for you all, you could explore things like microgrids where you have solar and batteries in specific buildings that can continue to operate even if there's a general blackout. I also want to make the point that one of the key strategies that PJM uses to ensure that the lights stay on and that there is enough generation and electricity at any time is to use a portfolio of assets to ensure grid reliability. This is important because no individual generator runs all the time. This is just as true for coal plants as it is for solar or wind facilities. For example, Prairie State Coal, which currently supplies a majority or a substantial amount of the electricity used here in St. Charles, was not available to generate energy about 10% of the hours in 2023. And similarly, in events like Winter Storm Uri, coal plants in Texas were unable to operate during the cold temperatures when their coal piles froze solid. And this is a quote from PJM. This is why PJM uses a diverse generation fleet, as well as a robust transmission system and analytical tools to provide reliable electricity to everyone they serve, which is 65 million Americans. I'll also just note that cleaner modern grids are able to combine renewables like wind and solar, batteries, transmission between regions, efficiency, demand response, and peaker plants to provide reliable generation. It is no longer the case that you must have coal plants running 90% of the time to ensure reliable service. Now let's talk a little bit about sustainability. I'll start with just some data noting that coal plants are among the most polluting forms of electrical generation. This is data from the Energy Information Administration, the EIA, and this is pounds of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is what you're perhaps most used to seeing. Kilowatt hours are what you might be used to seeing on your electrical meter at home. For every kilowatt hour generated at a coal plant, there is 2.3 pounds of CO2 released into the atmosphere. That's compared to less than a pound for each megawatt hour from a natural gas plant, and the average across all from coal, and as a result is very high in emissions. As Jeff already mentioned, Prairie State is the largest source of CO2 emissions in the state of Illinois. And we did some back of the envelope calculations, and it looks like IMEA's electricity was roughly 3 times more carbon intensive than Illinois' state average in 2022. Moreover, thinking beyond just greenhouse gases, Prairie State is the source of roughly 30% of sulfur dioxide emissions in Illinois. Sulfur dioxide exposure can lead to a variety of health conditions such as difficulty breathing, decreased lung function, and higher rates of hospitalization. And third, I want to talk a little bit about cost. The key message here is that coal is increasingly uneconomic compared to a variety of alternatives. And there's various factors that play into that. The first is that clean tech costs have fallen dramatically. 20 years ago, a lot of you may have heard stories about solar is just too expensive. Wind is too expensive. And that is simply not the case anymore. Globally, between 2013 and 2023, we saw 70% declines in the cost of offshore wind, solar, and batteries. And this is only expected to continue as we ramp up more and more deployment across the globe. Here I'm showing data, I'm sorry it's a little small on this projector, but the graph on the right shows the ranges in potential costs for different sources of generation. We have utility scale PV without any federal tax incentives, utility solar with tax incentives, onshore wind without tax incentives, onshore wind with tax credits, and then coal is the higher bar on the right. And then the last dot, which is hard to see, is $71. That's the cost solely to operate a plant that's already in existence and fully paid off. And the point I want to make here is that all these bars on the left, with or without tax incentives, are generally a lot lower than the coal bars. And once you factor in tax incentives, a new wind or solar facility is simply cheaper than running an existing coal plant. And as I mentioned before, wind and solar costs are expected to continue to decline further over time as we benefit from learning curves and ramping up further production. And this, in combination with the fact that natural gas has become much more cheaper over the last decade as a result of fracking, this has led to the steady decline in US coal-fired generation that we've been seeing. It's really functionally a story about economics and coal not being cost-effective anymore. And these retirements are projected to continue into the future. So I also want to make a point related to the dynamics we are seeing in the energy markets going forward. I can talk more about this later if necessary. I have another slide on it. But for a long time, things didn't really change in the energy industry. Say between the 1940s and the early 2000s. It was pretty much every year you had large coal and natural gas facilities and they would deliver power, and it was kind of a boring industry. And that is just not the case anymore. It is increasingly a dynamic industry. Things are changing increasingly rapidly with things like fracking, renewables, a variety of other things that have happened in just the last 15 years. And in that kind of dynamic market, I would argue or suggest that two important means of managing risk are diversification and scenario planning. And from what I have seen, IMEA is currently very reliant on 2 coal plants and has not seemingly conducted scenario analysis to see how their strategy would be affected by different future scenarios in which costs might vary, policies may vary, etc. And this creates various potential risks for IMEA and St. Charles, recognizing that some of these are low probability, but very impactful were they to happen. There might be reputational risks to the community that might deter investment from corporate partners who are very interested in maintaining a low emissions score. There might be market risks. What if electricity prices actually fall over the next 15 to 20 years and you're locked into a particularly high rate? There are asset risks. What happens if one of IMEA's 2 coal plants fails in a spectacular fashion? And then there are regulatory risks, recognizing that the regulatory environment has seesawed quite dramatically over the last 8 years. What if coal plants are forced to shut down early? This is not just an idle consideration. Prairie State is actively being sued due to an alleged failure to comply with EPA regulations. And CEJA, or the Clean Energy Jobs Act, requires Prairie State to have 0 emissions by 2045. How will they do it? And then, again, I think this is an outside issue, but I wanted to pose the question, what happens to St. Charles if IMEA goes bankrupt, or is put in a position where this coal plant is very uneconomic? So, finally, I want to offer a few case studies for what other communities have done, just to paint a picture for the alternatives that might be out there for you to consider. This one here is Springfield, Missouri. They also have a municipal utility that serves a city of about 170,000 people. They meet this demand with a portfolio of assets, including 45% renewables, particularly low-cost wind. And based on this quote from their Director of Communications and Energy Services, they see this portfolio, this diverse portfolio of assets, as critical to remaining, or to providing reliable service to their community, and help them through a recent winter storm. Chicago, this is one of the transactions my team worked on. They were unhappy with their retail provider's default offering. And so they went to the market, they issued a request for proposals, and got back several alternative bids, and ultimately signed a 5-year retail contract, which included a very large contract with a solar farm that serves 70% of the city's municipal load. The deal was so good that Cook County later signed essentially the same deal with the same providers in a 12-year agreement. Similarly, looking down at Taos, New Mexico, RMI did a little bit of work with Kit Carson Electric Cooperative, which provides electricity to 29,000 people. They were unhappy with their provider, Tri-State Generation and Transmission. In particular, they were frustrated by the limitations on local generation that were being put upon them. And so they switched suppliers and transitioned over to Guzman Energy. And this allowed them to increase the amount of renewables they bought and reduce customer bills by as much as 25%. So to conclude, a couple of observations. You all have options. There are a variety of cities and municipal utilities here in Illinois that have contracted with alternative providers, such as Constellation and Xera or other power marketers. Rochelle, Champaign, and Geneva are some examples of this. And I should note that consultants can do more than just procure electricity for you. For example, Batavia has hired a consultant to help them with a variety of other operational and strategic needs. How might such an alternative arrangement impact your goals? Reliability, again, would be likely unaffected, because functionally that is PJM's responsibility, and that would not change. Sustainability would almost certainly be enhanced, because you would not be relying on coal for almost all your power. And costs could decline if you were able to capture low-cost generation sources in the way that Chicago has. But at a minimum, you could work to have a more balanced portfolio that would be able to withstand future potential market or policy shifts. And you would be able to potentially mitigate a variety of other concerns associated with coal generation, such as financial exposure to regulatory and asset risks, public relations concerns, etc. So, I have 4 suggested next steps for you to consider. The first is to talk to people. There's a variety of other entities that you might want to talk to, such as peer communities, other customers of IMEA, municipalities who have taken other supply strategies. Talk to some alternatives providers, such as NextEra, Constellation, etc. We will hear a little bit more about this later in the evening, but there is an upcoming Illinois Public Utility Planning Program. Essentially, the state received a large grant to assist communities exactly like St. Charles, who have municipal utilities and co-ops, to help them think through their energy future. Consider hiring a consultant, someone who has an arm's length perspective on the situation and can guide you all over the coming years in selecting the best strategy for you. And then consider a competitive solicitation or collectively negotiating with IMEA to develop the energy future that you want to see. With that, I will turn it over to Dan, I think. Thank you very much.
Quite a crowd for 20-degree weather on Wednesday night. So, I don't have any slides, but I can talk a little bit about it. There is quite a bit of overlap, but just a little bit of background. Is that better? Yeah. All right. Okay. Just a little more background about myself. I have operated, I came out of college, I was a Navy nuke. I've operated nukes, coal plants, natural gas, combined cycle, simple cycle, reciprocating engines, wind, solar, battery projects. I've tried to develop projects in every state in the U.S. except Alaska, South Carolina, Mississippi. I've never actually been to Mississippi, and Arkansas. And so, I've seen the technologies evolve, and I'll get into that a little bit. But I want to explain to you how the grid works, right? And are there any electrical engineers in here? Okay, cover your ears. Okay, so the country's divided. The country's divided into 3 major bathtubs. Okay, so if you think about it, ComEd doesn't know, the utility doesn't know how much power this building's using right now. They don't know how much power you're using in your house, right? They have a meter, but traditionally the meter reader would come out later and read it, right? So how do they know how much power to put into the grid? It's just like a bathtub, right? And I can tell you this because I operated for 2 years at the bulk power system, and we had to balance the generation and the load. And how did we do that if we didn't have meters to tell us what the hell was going on? Frequency and voltage. So think of you got a bathtub. People are taking water out. You have no idea who's taking it out, how much they're taking it out. What I do know is how much water I'm putting into the tub and the level of the tub. Was that really offensive for an electrical engineer? Okay. So it's actually a pretty simple concept. And you got the Eastern Interconnect, you got the Western Interconnect, and you have the fine Republic of Texas because they don't want to be regulated by the federal government. But it's not really that much more complicated. People are going to talk about wheeling and balancing authorities and portfolios. It's a bathtub, right? And it's really hard for the operator or PJM or MISO to differentiate. They know basically where the power is going, but they don't know who's using it and how much they're using it. So, over the years, I have developed quite a few technologies, wind, solar, and the technologies have changed so much in my 35 years in the industry. It is absolutely amazing. When I started, wind prices subsidized for 120 bucks. Everybody said it was really expensive. What did they do? They made the turbine blades bigger and put them up higher, and those turbines almost produced twice as much as they did. As the ones today produce twice as much as they did as the ones from like 2005. Right? The technology has been absolutely amazing. Solar, I was up at O'Hare in 2009, and we met with the Secretary of Energy on it. Probably butchered his name. At that point, solar panels were around $3 a watt. Doesn't mean anything to you until I tell you. And he said solar panels are going to be under $1 by 2012. And we all sat there and laughed. Right? We're like, yeah, we're buying that. Sign me up for that price. I bought panels for 30 cents in 2012. And they were more efficient, right? And they were easier to install. Same thing happened to me when I built 2 battery projects in Illinois, Jake and Elwood. And Jake is in Joliet, and Elwood's out in West Chicago. And I think I spent about $400 a kilowatt hour for the batteries. Doesn't really matter, but I met with the Secretary of, it was Chu the first time, it was Monet the second time. Met with him up at O'Hare, and he said, how much did you spend on those batteries? And I said, $400 a kilowatt hour. He said, it's going to be below $150 by 2020, and we're at 100, right? So the technology is absolute, the curve is amazing what we're doing with the technology. So one of the reasons I bring this up is that there's so much advancement in technology and where the price is going, and the R&D that's gone into this, that you just don't really want to lock into an older technology without understanding what some of the other alternatives are. From a pricing perspective, the best resource to see how much the levelized cost of energy is from different technologies is a site called Lazard. They publish levelized cost of energy. They'll tell you subsidized, unsubsidized. They'll tell you what the overnight capital cost is. I highly recommend that you go and look at that. That's what the industry looks at.
Could you spell that?
Lazard, Lazard. And it's called LCOE, levelized cost of energy. And it's kind of the standard in the industry. Highly recommend that you go look at it. It's a great resource. It'll tell you marginal cost, it'll tell you capital cost, overnight cost, phenomenal resource. So, I think we talked about this a little earlier, but you guys got me nervous, man. Now I have to run.
She sounds great.
That's all that matters. Thank you. Okay, so competition. There are so many folks out there other than IME that can provide these services. It's obscene, right? Shell, Constellation, BP, Venergy, EDF, NG. The list goes on and on and on. And they would love to have you as a customer. They'd love to have Naperville as a customer. You guys are a big load. They'd love to be able to serve you. They'd love to be able to sync some of the generation here. So getting locked into one entity is a little concerning. So I was given the material to review, and the way I approached this was, if I was an executive and I had a fiduciary responsibility, could I execute these contracts? And I looked through the contracts, and I came up with a bunch of questions. And I think some of them are summarized in the handout. But the big one is, what's the price? I'm extending a contract out 10 years early, which is kind of bizarre, but from a fiduciary responsibility. Why am I locking into 2035 through 2050 in 2025, right? But you go through and you're like, what is the price? And there are a lot of other concerns associated with the way that, or from what I saw, it looks like a pass-through, so it looks like it's cost plus, but what's the plan, right? How are you going to comply with the 45% in 2035 procedure, right? It's just, and maybe if they came back to you and they said, we're going to sell you 10-cent power, or one penny power, right? Maybe you could hold your nose and say, okay, it's full, but that's a really good price. That's not what's out there right now. There's no price. Right? The other thing that was a little disconcerting is there's no exit, right? And we did see a letter from IMEA appeared pretty aggressive about letting people out of the contract. Renewable energy costs, rate stability, and production. So the thing I was most concerned about is if you put carbon capture on per state, it's a pass-through. How much is that? What's the plan? How are you going to comply? What's the cost? Right? How much are you signing up for? I mean, effectively, you're providing a blank check for IME to do what they want to do, acting as your agent. And that brings up the next question, is governance and control. If they're doing something that you, as a community, don't want, what ability do you have to affect that? Right? Regulatory risk, you know, I think we've seen that. What happens if they can't comply and it gets shut down? That project gets shut down. Where does that leave you guys with, in terms of supply, financial health of IMEA? I already brought that up. And then finally, I would say the technology advancements. And the big technology advancements I've seen in generation have to do with materials. Being able to put a turbine up 185 meters, being able to use solar technology so that you can use it as the coating of a building or roofing tiles, right? Even some of the stuff in natural gas, there's a lot of technology out there, and you're locking into technology that, I mean, you basically used in 1920, 1940, 1960. And so there's real concerns, and it's not that they can't address these concerns, it's just in the material that I reviewed, I haven't been able to come up with those answers. And I would hope as a community, I live in Elmhurst, I don't live in St. Charles, but I hope for your community that you get those questions answered before they ask you to enter into a contract. That's all I
have. Okay. Can folks hear me okay? All right. Are we ready for our energy exam? I'm Christine Anicelli. I'm a senior campaign representative with Sierra Club, Illinois. I'm going to try to bring us home here with a couple of positive bits of good news. The first being, well, you heard some very impressive backgrounds from my colleagues up here. The reason I felt, and still feel, as though my bachelor's degree in religion and political science remains adequate is because in all of my campaigning work, which is actually about 20 years now, I did not update my profile, as Susan and Debbie have asked me to, for my intro. But the reason it is more than adequate is because in all of the campaign work I have seen and been a part of, policies either pass or don't pass, not because there's enough or not enough technical expertise in the room. It's never about that. It comes down to political power. That's what it is about. So the good news, if for all except 3 hands, the 3 hands who are electric engineers, all the rest of you, you guys are in good company because your voice is about political power. You have what you need to impact these decisions. We've got to figure out how to use it in a meaningful way and to know exactly what to ask for. So if some of these things have felt really intense and hard to totally understand, and there are definitely moments for myself working in the power sector where I feel that way. It is important to know that knowing all of the ins and outs and details did not necessarily impact change. It is about political power and knowing you guys have a voice and it matters and it needs to be heard. So that is one bit of good news, and the other bit of good news is I think I have an idea for what might be able to help sort through some of these big decisions and address some of the risks and changing energy landscape issues that my colleagues here talked about in a way that's helpful. And as soon as Susan, here we go.
I am getting it.
We're going to try to make this sound pretty exciting. As exciting as energy policy can get. But I think thank you, Susan. Folks, give it up for Susan and Debbie and all the great folks that helped organize this event. Thank you. Integrated resource plans. We're going to talk about a critical tool that helps communities and helps entities like IMEA answer these critical questions about the most cost-effective energy supply to offer customers. How to cost-effectively meet reliability requirements for those regional grid operators. How to meet environmental compliance obligations. This is going to be one of the best tools, and of note, and we'll talk about this, is it is one of the most important tools to support you all as ratepayers and as city council members in doing your responsibility as in oversight. Municipal utilities, electric cooperatives, they don't report to the Illinois Commerce Commission. They don't report to the state. They're governed by you guys. Oversight falls to you. So it's okay that you don't know all the questions to ask. That's okay. If you don't know off the top of your head the levelized cost of energy, that's okay. We've got tools that are going to ask the right questions and provide a space, most importantly, for you to engage in a conversation about what the future of your energy supply is going to look like. And that's an integrated resource plan. So what is an integrated resource plan, or an IRP? Basically, it's a long-term planning process. It is a very basic, good governance practice that most utilities and entities do in this space. It emerged starting in the 1980s or so. We saw a lot of volatility in the 70s, we saw an oil embargo, we saw a lot of cost overruns in building new plants. And so this concept of an IRP emerged during that time at a very basic level to look at least cost plans for utilities to deliver the needed energy supply to their customers. It is about consumer protections first and foremost. Key elements: forecasting. In particular, your future energy needs. This is increasingly important right now. For a long time, we saw demand for energy stay flat, maybe even decline as well. We're in a new landscape. We're seeing demand for energy grow pretty significantly. We're seeing the electrification of our buildings. We're seeing the electrification of our transportation systems. We're seeing an influx of interest in data centers. And so really having accurate projections, high scenarios, medium scenarios, conservative scenarios of what your projected energy needs are a really critical part of that energy planning and making sure that we're thinking and planning and investing in what that resource mix is to meet those future needs. The resource planning component is taking a look at all different types of resource options. You take a look at your existing generation sources. So we've got a couple of coal units to take a look at. IMEA has some clean energy too, let's be fair. but taking a look and seeing what are the future costs, forward-going costs of those generation sources, how do they compare to market prices, how do they compare to other energy mixes, and taking a look and seeing what is the most cost-effective energy portfolio that meets your environmental compliance obligations under CEJA, potential federal rules, although those are probably going to go out the window tomorrow if they haven't already today. And also what are the reliability needs that that IMEA is required to meet for PJM and MISO. So those are all scenario planning to take a look at what those best options are. Cost-benefit analysis, risk, uncertainty, those are all key things. And you have a much better sense at key decision points and what those options are for what the future of your energy portfolio should look like. What decisions are ahead for the utility, such as carbon capture. How much is that going to cost? Is that a good investment? What about a gas conversion? What about contracting a power purchase agreement with a gas plant? Or making a substantial investment in battery storage? These are all key questions that do need to be asked and answered and evaluated. We don't know we don't know what decisions are happening around that. You're being asked to renew a power sales contract without much clarity on what the future plan of those of that product that you're being asked to buy for a very long time. It'd be like buying a house without getting an inspection report. You want an inspection report, and you want a voice in those decision points. It shouldn't only come down to, should we renew our power sales contract once every couple decades? Integrated resource plans are done typically every 2 to 3 years by other utilities around the country. Because of how Dan just described, how vastly ever-changing the market is. You need to be constantly planning and evaluating and assessing it as an iterative process. That makes sense. Typical flow. And as I mentioned, maybe I didn't mention previously, the public engagement process. The public really needs to be engaged at all different parts in this process. Understanding the forecast, having access to the modeling scenarios. You might not understand all the models, but you're going to want a sense of like what data is being utilized. Communities have an opportunity to identify key needs that they might have. Maybe St. Charles wants to do a big electric vehicle push. And so there will be a higher demand potentially for your energy. Thinking about some of those components are an important part of energy planning. So the benefits. First and foremost, consumer interests. Let's not make bad investment decisions on our existing generation resources, but let's also make wise investments in new generation sources that we're taking a look at. A second key component, this was one of the leading issues that emerged from integrated resource plans. Take a look at energy efficiency. We talk a lot about how to get about supply, but we're not thinking enough and a lot about how to reduce our demand. The cheapest energy is the energy we don't use. The more investments we can be making in energy efficiency, consumers, for every $1 we make on energy efficiency, consumers see the benefit of $3 on their utility bills. It also just reduces demand and strain on the power grid, which is increasingly important right now. There needs to be a rigorous assessment of those demand-side energy efficiency opportunities for customers. So IRPs today. Most states require this. This is not an anomaly. 35 states require this of their utilities. Illinois, we are a bit unique. We are a deregulated state for electricity. So ComEd and Ameren are investor-owned utilities. They do not own power plants, generation sources. Those are separated. However, municipal utilities and electric cooperatives are what we would call vertically integrated entities, at least the ones that we're talking about today. Meaning you own, IMEA owns generation sources, has a captive customer base, meaning it's harder for you guys to exit as a muni and co-op ratepayer than it is for me as a ComEd ratepayer to jump to an alternative electric retail supplier. Does that make sense? And those whatever those investments are in those generation sources can be passed on to you as customers. ComEd doesn't have anything to make investments in like that to pass on. If they do with their distribution grid, that has to be approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission. We don't have those mechanisms for ratepayers like you guys. That is part of why an integrated resource plan is so critically important for munis and co-ops here in Illinois. So a quick look, and I will have to, this is an RMI report. This is one of my favorite graphics, actually. But here's what I'll tell. I mean, I think you guys, being with the Sierra Club, I'm not going to tell you what, I don't think there's a need for me to talk about different sources of energy. I think it's best to just let the answers speak for themselves, and we heard this a little bit from Steve as well. This is a snapshot of what IRPs are looking like today. A cross-section of a number of different, over 104 utility resource plans coming out of 2022. Those are the trajectories. So below is what's being retired. What's being retired? Coal. It's more expensive to maintain coal plants than it is to retire them. We're seeing some gas retirements. Notably, we are seeing some gas investments. We're a little skeptical about that, concerned that those will become stranded assets, meaning they're not going to deliver on their investment. But overwhelmingly, clean energy, solar, wind, storage. That is where people are making their investments. Another key benefit, as I mentioned before, strengthened local control and oversight. That's you guys. They're not going to report to the Illinois Commerce Commission. That's not the model. The public power model is actually pretty cool, if it works. But it's not quite working as it is intended to. And notably, knowing how to ask these questions is really hard. Utility oversight is a hard thing to do if you are not an expert. Of course you're not. That's why you have integrated resource plans, a centralized, focal planning process that asks those questions for you and distills in a transparent way what key decision points lie ahead for your future energy supply. And it gives you a voice in what you want to do about it. That's a tool. This is an oversight tool for you and your city council members. I'll just note a couple of cool things that are happening in IRP development. We're just seeing increasingly more inclusive ways of thinking about stakeholder engagement. And what does it look like to meaningfully engage ratepayers and the public in such critical decisions impacting their energy supply? Engaging folks throughout the entire process of an IRP plan. Making sure that modeling data is open and transparent. It's a term called open source modeling. Oftentimes, if you hire a consultant, they utilize get the licensing rights for a model. They can't show you the data. You got to keep that behind closed doors. More and more, we're seeing open source modeling, so everyone has access to the data and can really see and have a good look at all of those different assumptions. Incorporating equity and environmental justice into integrated resource planning. Understanding how to really meet the needs of underserved low-income customers How are we thinking about equity in that way? How are we thinking about environmental justice and disproportionate exposure to environmental pollution in our energy supply? And then considering additional climate impacts beyond what the basic existing environmental compliance obligations are. A lot of folks thinking about the social cost of carbon, thinking about more ambitious sustainability goals. IMEA has a sustainability plan. Thinking about what that could look like and model. Until you model those scenarios and put it in an integrated resource plan and think about how to financially meet that goal, how to meet your reliability requirements, you're not serious about it. When you put it in an IRP, it shows that you're serious. We have to think of how to balance those three things: environmental compliance and sustainability, cost effectiveness, and reliability. An IRP drives a process to assess how to meet all three of those things and asks you what you think about it. So here's Sierra Club's recommendation, for what it's worth. We think this should be a basic requirement of any energy supplier that you guys go with. It should just be entrance, like, to get in the door. We're going to do a basic good governance utility practice because the majority of utility entities do this. It should be no different than anyone else. So that should be first and foremost. Ideally, IMEA would commit to do IRPs and actually run one so you guys could get a chance to see what that process looks like. You could participate in it. You could see what different modeling scenarios they're looking at. You can see what the projections are and decision points for the future of their generation supply. How are they planning to comply with CEJA? Are they going with carbon capture? Are they going to do a gas conversion? Are they going to retire a unit? If so, what investments are they going to make to replace that? Those are all key decision points. It's hard to know. You haven't really seen what the future plan is of the product you're being asked to buy. So that would be a recommendation. Now, I'll share. We have legislative proposals out there. Municipal Electric Cooperative Transparency and Planning Act and the Clean and Reliable Grid Act. Those are not going to be the bill numbers for this year. We have a new legislative session, so stay tuned. But Representative Yang Rohr introduced an exciting proposal requiring that munis and co-ops and joint action agencies like IMEA do this every 3 years. Basic requirement to offer this to ratepayers. It's not managed by Illinois Commerce Commission. It doesn't require any type of state approval. It says do the thing that we know is a good basic best practice. I will say we've had a couple of good conversations with IMEA about this. I think we're making some progress. So I'm cautiously optimistic about some movement on this issue. But the results of such a thing, I think, are going to be really important for St. Charles to consider. And certainly whether or not we get that across the finish line. And I think, as maybe Steve mentioned, we have secured federal grants to help pay for such energy planning and modeling, so that the costs would not solely fall on ratepayers to run a model, to do this every few years. There's funds to support that. And lastly, I'll leave with how I started. Public power requires you. It all comes down to what you do from here. And I think my biggest recommendation is get involved. I think we'll hear some calls to action next. Do it. That's the only way this is going to change. And you don't need to know, again, the levelized cost of energy. That's going to be done in the IRP. But we need your voice And City Council needs to hear from you, and IMEA needs to hear from you, and your state legislators need to hear from you that this is important. You want a voice, you want transparency, you want to have a voice in the future of your energy supply. Simple as that. And it's not going to come down to who has the technical expertise or who gets the consultant. It's going to come down to you and whether or not you show up and demand it. It comes down to political power. So you guys have everything you need right here. Just got to use it. So thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you. Oh, it's on. Thank you to you, Christine, and thank you also to Steve and Dan for your insightful presentations tonight. Before we do questions and answers, I do want to share with you a taped presentation, or it's just 2 minutes long, from J.C. Kibbe, who is the State of Illinois Climate Advisor. So he was kind enough, he's down in Springfield, and he's kind enough to do a talk for us today.
Good evening, St. Charles. My name is J.C. Kibbe. I'm a climate advisor for the state of Illinois. And I hear you got together tonight to talk about the clean energy transition in your community, specifically how you can move your municipal utility towards cleaner sources of energy. While you're having that conversation, I wanted to flag something for you that might be of interest. It's a program that we have been working on at the state level. It is already funded, and we plan to roll it out in the months to come. It's called the Public Utility Planning Program. It provides technical assistance and grants to communities like yours with municipal and co-op utilities that are looking to make that transition towards cleaner energy. I probably don't need to tell you about the many benefits of cleaner energy. It preserves a livable climate. It brings us cleaner air. It protects our health. It creates jobs and economic development, and it can provide lower utility bills for our households and for businesses. We created this program because of feedback from folks just like you that live in communities served by municipal and co-op utilities that are trying to learn more about their options for clean energy, but for whatever reason have found that difficult and need resources or guidance along the way to figure out what that transition should look like for them and what the potential opportunities can be. Ultimately, it'll be you and your neighbors that make the decision about what the right energy future is for your community. But what I hope is that this program will offer you information and tools to understand what those opportunities can look like to help chart that path towards the clean energy economy. So I want to thank you for your thought, for your work, for your civic mindedness, the time to work on this really important but sometimes complicated issue. And I know that if we all work together across the state, that we can.
I think he's almost finished. So, unfortunately, that's the internet connection. So, let me go on then. We're going to do questions and answers now. And I'm going to stand over here with the mic. As you can see, you need to practically have your lips on, unfortunately. We're going to line up. If you come this way, and then I'll stand here with a mic. I ask that you each ask one question so that we can get as many people to ask a question as possible. I ask you to please refrain from making a statement or a statement of opinion. You are welcome to do that at a city council meeting if you're so inclined. But we'd like to leave it to questions that we can ask our three panelists tonight. And if there should be time, you know, if you have a second question, get back at the end of the line once everybody's had a chance to ask at least one question. And if there is time for another question from a person who's already asked it, that's fine. So, come on up.
Hi, my name's Craig. I had a question on IMEA's interpretation of an IRP. If we sat them down in this room, would they view that they have a version of that already? And it comes down to semantics as to whether or not we view their disclosure as being acceptable. And that's more of a proactive attempt to avoid them not answering the question or providing this should we ever ask.
Good news, Craig, and great question. I have asked IMEA that very question. What I can say is initially we got a very nice little folder with a couple of leaflets saying we do energy planning. I pulled out a 250-page integrated resource plan that they conducted. They have done an IRP before, 2002, and said these are two pretty different work products. And I think that helped get the message across that we're looking for much more granular data and transparency around that. So I think there's an acknowledgement that there's a big difference between doing small piecemeal resource plans around, you know, let's say a small solar project versus a comprehensive resource, like all-encompassing integrated resource plan. And obviously a significant distinction between a sustainability plan and an integrated resource plan. So yeah, we're making progress on that.
Hi, I'm Linda Robertson, and I worked in, this is close. I worked in research and development, and I'm just curious, has IMEA made plans for new technology? Because anytime you sign up for I know in my own career, we did huge amounts of conservation, water reuse and recovery, which of course affected energy for corporations. What is do they have plans for new technology and incorporating this?
Take a shot at this. They have made an investment recently in solar, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure someone else in the audience maybe has the latest data in that. I've been told that they're going to do a battery storage study next year. Battery storage is one of the fastest growing resources. I think you can put that, let's look at that right away in an IRP, and you know what I mean? I'm not sure why we're taking that to a study, but that's where we're at. But again, where we gotta put it out to market, run an IRP, and let's see what the best resources are. Let the market decide.
Dan or Steve, did either of you have a comment on that, or?
Well, I think it goes back to the transparency issue. But you can't tell. I don't know what they're doing. It's not public. So without being able to see anything, you can't verify that they're actually doing it.
And I think I've heard in conversation that they are looking at carbon sequestration as one of the options for Prairie State. But I would note that while that could be an exciting opportunity in the future, it is fairly untested and not being rolled out at large scale in the US. So banking on that as a solution doesn't seem prudent at this point.
Hello, my name is Greg Taylor, and I'd like to know from the panelists, after taking into account just how rapidly changing the power generation market is right now, and then also taking into account the required lead time for companies to acquire new power contracts, what would be the appropriate time frame for the city of St. Charles to put out an RFQ for different power sources given that our current contract doesn't expire until 2035? Thank you.
So as a developer, it's really dependent on the resource. So if St. Charles wanted a battery, we'd probably put a battery in St. Charles at one of your substations within 6 months. On solar, probably need about a year and a half. A lot of that has to do with uncertainty of the panels and the tariffs. Wind, I don't think you want to connect wind directly to St. Charles. I think you're going to have some FAA issues right now. There's just FAA issues in general, given the executive orders. But wind probably needs about a 3-year lead time. Natural gas is 3 to 5 years. Coal is 7 to 15, and I will be dead before they build another nuke. I'm sure Sierra Club feels different.
Yeah, I'll just add, when we worked with Chicago, I think from that whole process did take several years, it's probably 3 to 4. I would also encourage you all to start these conversations now. Like, there's no need to wait for 2030 to start thinking about what your energy future should look like.
And I would just offer, ask IMEA to do an IRP, run that process. Let's see the results of the IRP. In the meantime, you guys can put out an RFQ and see what other proposals you get. And so by the time, within 18 months perhaps, you can look at things all across the board and see what your different options are. But you don't really have a good look and a good sense of the product and the from IMEA at this structure. Yeah.
So there's 30 gigawatts of generation in the queue in Illinois, south of 80. Those guys would love to have a contract. If you put out an RFP tomorrow, you'd probably get 150 or 200 proposals. And they could be online by 27.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Graff. And this may not be a question for the panelists as much as the people who are hosting this. That is, where is our city council now in terms of, are they planning to sign the next contract? Are they already in position to do that? How quickly do we have to do it?
I don't think I or anyone on the panel or who organized this event can speak for City Council. All we can say is the proposal from IMEA was brought to City Council last spring, and City Council has been hearing from us and hearing from IMEA for the past several months. IMEA has given or has said that they want a decision from City Council by April 30th of 2025 this year. I don't know what City Council is going to do with that quote-unquote deadline. I do know that the City of Naperville has the same request in front of it, and they seem to have indicated that they are not going to be making this decision on IMEA's timeline. And I cannot speak, I don't know where the City Council of St. Charles is. I know they're working hard to try to make a decision.
Could I add some color to that, though?
Sure.
Unless you're trying to put carbon capture out there or build a coal plant, the lead times for these projects would not give you the impression that you need to sign something 10 years in advance. Solar can be completed in less than a year. Batteries can be completed in less than 6 months. A wind farm can be completed in 3 years. A gas plant, I don't think you could permit one in Illinois right now, but you could probably permit one in Indiana and move it up put it in the bathtub. You can do that in 5 years, right? So the idea that you need to contract out 10 years, there's something else going on where they need long lead time items and permits and such.
Nice. My goodness, yeah, you really did. So my name is Robert Casper. I'm just curious. You said Dan, I believe it was that said that you had a chance to kind of look at some of the IMA proposal. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay.
I reviewed it.
Within that proposal, is there any language regarding like, well, if you guys don't sign by April 2025, is there going to be any like specific signing consequence versus delaying the process? Obviously, to me, this whole thing feels like a used car deal thing, where they're trying to lock you in on something and you don't know what you're getting.
I think the analogy was buying a house without an inspection. I think it's more like buying a house without an inspection or a price.
My wife just finished paying off her car. She was getting offers for like a good year from the dealership to lock her in for a new car.
I didn't see anything specifically in the contract that said you make a decision or you're out.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Paul.
There you go.
So my first question was about timeline, and you've already answered that. Next question is, what are the options? So if it's not IMEA between after April, are there other competitive situations that council's talking to?
I don't know who your council's talking to, but I'm sure we could give you a list of 15 people to go out and get a price quote from.
Well, and there's council people here tonight too. Whether, so there are other options.
Absolutely. And a lot of them, and they'd love for you to be their customer.
Okay, so it can be done in a timely manner.
By 2035, when your contract runs out, most certainly.
Or after 2025. So after 2025, then we're done with IMEA.
No.
2035.
I know, but I mean, you're saying that the IMEA wants an answer by 2020, by April.
Yeah, that would give you plenty of time to run an RFP. And select your generation mix and your level of rigidity and reliability, whether it's local, you want to buy it from Illinois, you want to buy it. You have a lot of options because this really does work like a bathtub, right? So you can put it right by you, right? You can attach some things to your grid very quickly without having to get permission, like batteries and solar. Some of the others are more dependent, but just to give you an idea, Rocky Road, which is over in Aurora, is a 400 megawatt gas plant. A year and a half ago, it was sold for $13 million. So there's distressed gas out there. You don't know where Illinois is going to go with the gas. I'm sure that my panelists have a different view of this, but my mother loves renewables, but she really likes lights. And so you're going to need to put some gas on the grid to keep the lights on.
Jordan McClay, somebody mentioned Geneva as having an alternative approach here. Could you describe what Geneva is doing? The Tri-Cities are not working together on this apparently.
I think that last part is accurate. Yes, I would have to look at the specifics, but I believe they have a supply contract with a power marketer similar to what Dan was talking about. So Constellation, NextEra, it was almost dramatic. One of the various other entities that is out there and would be very happy for your business.
A couple of years ago, I was contacted by Con Ed, who thought I was getting power from Con Ed, and I could elect to pay probably a little extra something to support renewables energy. But that apparently is not something that's possible today in St. Charles. We have no choice.
Correct.
We are locked in.
Correct.
Till 2035.
Yes.
I'm sorry about that.
And just to follow up a little bit on your question about Geneva, for those of you who may not know, the three cities, St. Charles is a member of IMEA, and that's what we've been talking about tonight. IMEA is a full contracts provider. In other words, the city of St. Charles, the city of Naperville, and the other 30 members of IMEA get all of their electricity from IMEA, and of that electricity that IMEA supplies, about 80% is from 2 coal plants, okay? They do have, as was mentioned by one of our speakers, they do have a component of wind and solar that make up that other 20%, okay? Batavia and Geneva are members of NIMPA, the Northern Illinois Electric Municipal Electric Agency. Each one of them has a power sales agreement. There's only 3 members of NIMPA, Geneva, Batavia, and Rochelle. And they each have a power sales agreement that is slightly different from each other. The city of Batavia gets 100% of its energy from NIMPA, and the only source of electricity that NIMPA has is Prairie State Energy Campus, which is the coal plant. Geneva gets approximately 74% of its electricity from NIMPA. So Geneva gets about 74% of its electricity from Prairie State, and then they have a NextEra contract, and then Geneva also has a methane plant with Old Settlers Hill, and they have a natural gas peaker plant that they run like in the summertime when they need more power than they're getting from the other sources. And Rochelle has a similar situation. I don't know the particulars of Rochelle's contract, but Rochelle also gets a fair amount through NIMPA from Prairie State, and then has other sources as well.
Can I piggyback on top of that?
Sure.
So one of the things we're seeing in the industry right now is that there's 200 or 2,000 gigawatts of generation trying to connect in the U.S. The data centers have announced 400 gigawatts, which is ridiculous. That's more than the peak of Moist and PJM combined. And the utilities are telling them they can't connect until 2030, 2032. You know who can connect them next year? You guys can. And so you need to be really careful in your contract that when these data centers come calling and they're going to put $2 billion, $4 billion, $6 billion into your tax base, that you have the flexibility to locate them here. They're really attractive industrial customers because there's no truck traffic, right? They just pay a lot of taxes. And you need to have that flexibility from an economic development perspective to bring in large loads like that.
Christy?
I was just going to say, maybe we could schedule another forum on data centers. I have a few things to add to that, but yeah, for another night.
Well, I do want to thank you for all your questions, and thank you again to our speakers for the knowledge and expertise that they shared with all of us, and to address this topic and the momentous decision that the City of St. Charles is facing. You should have received a call to action handout as you came in. If you didn't, please make sure you pick one up. It looks kind of like this. On one side of the handout is a list of 10 questions that we believe that the St. Charles City Council needs to get answers to. Most of these questions are ones that Dan Foley formulated in his presentation. On the other side of the handout are the 4 action items that each of us can take in the coming weeks and months. First, write to your city council members and let them know that you want them to get expert advice on energy alternatives, to not sign the IMEA contract until IMEA engages with its members and their constituents in a transparent energy planning process. And finally, to support legislation that promotes prudent local and state energy planning. Second, attend City Council meetings and voice your opinions and concerns about St. Charles's energy future. Third, please vote in the April 1st, 2025 election. Candidates for St. Charles Mayor and 6 City Council seats will be on the ballot. Visit the website or Facebook page of the League of Women Voters of Kane County for election information, including a candidate forum for St. Charles offices next Wednesday, January 29th at the St. Charles Public Library, and I hope they fix their sprinkler system by then. And lastly, please sign up to keep informed or get involved. We need you to become part of the Tri-Cities Clean Energy team. You can do it by using that QR code on the handout or on the screen up here, and we will make sure that you get on our emailing list about upcoming meetings, information, and City Council meetings. And most of all, thank you all for coming tonight. Kelly?
The forum is on Monday, not Wednesday.
The 20. Oh, I'm sorry, Monday the 29th. I apologize. Has that changed, Patty? All right. I saw the 29th, but I'm sorry. Check the website. That's on the other handout. It has the League of Women Voters website. So thank you for coming tonight. Have a safe trip home, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future.